And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
RCPA chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roger, planet.
Water towers fly! Yes!
Tango down to nominal.
Flight downside FD off. Bring in FD off. Off. It's orange!
145. Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
What is it?
Put that in the big bag, Jingle.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
This methane would be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You dead? Sure. We don't need any more of these.
All right, folks, you know the deal. Let me look over and make sure the little lights are blinking correctly. I think I see lights that are blinking in the correct order. John Galloway with an SF today, here to do another Astro Live. I'm going to read some chats and see if y'all can hear me. Also, today's a very special show. You can see we have ASL interpretation. Oh, I should point over this way, I guess. Right here down below me throughout the course of the show. Also, we're going to have live captioning. So if you check in the chat or down in the description, you'll see a link that you can click, and it allows you to read live captions, text interpretations of what's going to be said on today's show. It's actually really cool. You can change the font sizes and colors and contrast and that sort of stuff with the live text. But today's show is all about how we can improve accessibility, specifically for astronomy. It's Astronomy for Everyone is the name of the show, but a lot of very cool things to make today's show accessible to as many people as possible. A couple things real quick, by the way. You also see a fundraiser down on the bottom of the screen. If you've seen these shows before, you know that we don't normally take super chats and read out things like that because we want to focus on the guests. But we're trying out a new thing here where you can actually directly support Intrepid Museum's accessibility programs while watching this show. So super chats are actually turned off if you're watching on YouTube. And if you click on that, you can support the museum directly. It is a donation, not what you would normally send like a tip or anything like that, but it goes directly to the museum as a donation as an actual nonprofit. So trying out some new things today. I'll be reading chat and everything that's going on, but the show's not about me. I'm just here to help with the housekeeping, such as Astro Live is supported through a NASA cooperative agreement awarded to the New York Space Grant Consortium, and other important things that make the show possible, like the fact that y'all keep showing up. Let's hop over here and introduce our guests for today. We have a lot of cameras that are going to be on the screen, but let's see what we're doing to make astronomy more accessible and inclusive for everyone. Who do we have? Summer! How's it going, Summer?
It's going great. How are you, Doc?
I am hanging in there, and you are going to introduce our special guest here today, aren't you?
I sure can.
All right, let's turn it over to y'all.
All right. So, hi, everybody. Today, full disclosure, I'm joined by two awesome women that I happen to know in real life. So I'm really excited that I just get to spend the next hour and a half geeking out with them and letting you see how cool they are and their work is. So joining me today, we have Kimberly Arcand, and she is a visualization scientist with NASA Chandra's X-ray Observatory. And also joining us is Alicia Arnio, and she is the co-founder of the American Astronomical Society Working Group on Accessibility and Disability, WGAD. And you both have been in astronomy for a long time. I think, Kim, you've been in it longer than I have, but either way, I love the fact that you are both in the field. And I'm so thrilled to have you both here today.
Thanks, Summer. It's really nice to be here with you always.
Yay. So I wanted to just sort of start just to kind of put some context in the conversation that we're going to have today and ask both of you sort of why the work that you do in this area is important to you. Sort of why do you do what you do? And who wants to go first?
I can go, I guess. Yeah, I think it's just really important to have a diversity of thought in any program, and particularly when you're trying to do big, challenging things. Having the universe belong to everybody, right, is I think a really important thing because when you take the time to work with diverse communities and create content and products and different kinds of research outputs that are good for everybody and not just a small group, it's a wonderful thing to have the result of that because 10 times out of 10, whenever we try and make something more accessible, we end up just making it better for everybody. It's like the cut curb effect. You cut a curb and a whole lot of people use that cut curb, whether it's the person in a wheelchair, whether it's someone on crutches with a broken leg, whether it's a parent with a stroller, whether it's a cyclist cutting across to deliver a pizza. I mean, whatever it is, right? Everybody is using that cut curb in a different way. And that's what I love about accessibility.
I would say for me, along my personal journey, I was seeing the barriers that people were encountering along the way, starting very early, like even as an undergraduate. And then through grad school, I was actually, losing colleagues along the way because they were encountering these barriers and could not participate. And now that I'm finally in this position of power, I'm a professor, I can do something. I've really begun to focus carefully on how I present material, whether spaces like the one I'm in right now, our planetarium, is actually accessible, because I would like to see people who come into our field be able to stay in our field, not just to stay in it, but also to have an equitable experience and equitable outcomes along the way. Because just like Kimberly said, the more minds that we have in the room, the more diverse thought that we have around problems, the more solutions we find, and the bigger our universe gets.
I love that. So you're mentioning barriers to access, and obviously the first thing that comes to mind is like a physical barrier sort of thing. But what are the range of barriers that you see as restricting access to our field these days?
So there are physical barriers, of course, which are very common in astronomy because a lot of our observatories are physically older. They were built, in the early 1900s. Our observatory at my university actually doesn't have a chairlift to get up to the telescope. That's kind of the zeroth order thing. If you're trying to even read publications, for instance, so people who are low vision or blind are using screen readers to engage with these papers, and they are in kind of a difficult to access typesetting language that doesn't let you easily jump around in the content of the paper. I mean, can you imagine having to memorize an equation and then remember as you come across it later in the paper? Like, it's just that kind of being able to put thoughts together quickly gets even harder because of the way that you're engaging with the content. And then as far as older publications go, a lot of them aren't even OCR, just optical character recognition. So you have a picture of a paper that's a PDF instead of it being actual searchable text that can be read out loud. And those are the kinds of things that we're starting to attack with the working group to try to get at those barriers.
Yeah, just the physical access that you mentioned about to observatories. The last place I worked, the building had 13 floors. The building had 14 floors. The elevator only went to 13, and the observatory was on the roof, which is technically 15.
I think I know what you're talking about.
And then stairs into the dome. And it was just like, oh my gosh. It wasn't just, a barrier for someone to walk the stairs, but for anyone who needed to transport like large pieces of equipment, kind of what you were saying, Kimberly, like the cut curb situation. And it was so frustrating because I wanted to be able to advertise our events as being accessible, but really only the part that took place in the lecture hall was, and the stargazing wasn't. Real quick, Alicia, can you describe like the working group and the work that it does? And you were a co-founder, so how did that come about to begin with?
Yeah, so we began at Inclusive Astronomy, which was in 2015 in Nashville, hosted at Vanderbilt University. And it was basically everybody descended on a meeting room who was interested in accessibility, and we passed around a sheet to write email addresses on. It's like, hey, why don't we start this thing? And we noticed that the vast majority of people in the room were younger, earlier career folks who were already coming up against barriers very early on. And there were actually rules within the AAS that junior members couldn't serve on committees. So we had to first petition to be allowed to serve and then petition to form the committee. So two good things in a row happened there. And we are basically a very loose, very broadly distributed working group because we need the most people possible. Whoever has the energy at a given time can jump in and work on our projects.
Nice. I also wanted to remind you that if you have visuals that you want to support anything that you're saying, feel free to call them out to DOS while we're talking. But speaking of that, Kim, I wanted to ask you more about how you got started in this area I almost think maybe it's a natural extension from visualization, because that's already another way to make something more accessible. Is that right?
Yeah. So I've worked for an X-ray telescope for like my whole career, essentially for 25 years. And it's the type of light that no human can naturally detect, right? It's pretty far outside the human realm of visible light or optical light. And so for 25 years, I've been thinking about how to translate something that's invisible. And when you're talking about particular objects that the Chandra X-ray Observatory studies, like exploding stars and black holes, blazars and quasars, I mean, they sound so fantastical, right? That having to think so hard about taking these esoteric and abstract concepts and make them a little bit more accessible in general. That's just, I think my mind has always kind of moved towards how can we make this better, right? You don't just need to prioritize a visual, right? You can create different kinds of science products. It doesn't just have to be a two-dimensional image. If you have good data, you can make a three-dimensional model. And then once you have a three-dimensional model, you can make a three-dimensional print, right? We learned how to 3D print because we had some colleagues at the Smithsonian who had 3D scanned and 3D printed President Obama's head. And so I'm like, well, if they can 3D print President Obama's head, I'm pretty sure we can figure out how to 3D print an exploded star, right? Like that shouldn't be a big jump. And so we did. And at the same time, I had a very, very close colleague, Wanda Diaz. She's an astronomer, she's a computer scientist, and she lost her sight when she was a teenager. And she would tell me these stories on how she used to be in math class, trying to learn astronomy, and her professors would just be writing equations on a board and she couldn't access that information. And that just really struck me as a very powerful thing. Like, we should all have the right to education. And so to not be able to have access to all of those equations on the board, right? That was a very challenging thing. And yeah, with like her kind of guidance, she has gone on to specialize in data sonification, which is the idea of translating information into sound. But before we even got there, this idea of taking tactile information and working with students at the National Federation of the Blind, and really just trying to make those 3D prints shine, for lack of a better word, making them very useful to the community, making sure that they added value, that they were clear for how to make meaning, that we weren't creating something for students who were blind, that we were creating something with students who are blind or low vision. And we learned so much from those students. I think that's just changed my mind and how I think about things now. And I've just never looked back. It was a very important moment to go through that project and just kind of think, oh, this really works. And what else can we do?
Yeah. I want to talk about the photo that DOS put up first, but first, DOS, could you pull up the one that's says like different wavelengths or something? I can't remember what it's entitled, but it kind of shows at least, that one.
No. That one?
So that's the one.
Okay.
Yes. That's a good one. Yeah.
First of all, Kim, where's the radio?
Well, I just had these 4 kinds of light for M51, the Galaxy. That's all I had in my back pocket. But if you want to toss the radio over to me, I'll add it.
But second of all, so what is this showing, and what are you seeing? Like, what does Chandra see that you wouldn't see if you were looking with this other wavelengths?
Yeah, so this is showcasing 4 very, very different kinds of light. So just to back up for a second, if we were only looking at the type of light that human eyes can naturally detect, which is optical light or visible light, It would be like if you're playing the piano, having middle C and a few keys on either side. Or if you're a sports ball person, if you were looking out onto a baseball, I'm not a sports ball person, but if you were looking out onto a baseball or softball ball field, it would be like the third base foul line and a little bit on either side, right? So it's a very small, limiting amount of information that you would have access to. If we want to bring up the M51 images again, you can very clearly detect that what you're going to see in optical light is beautiful. This is Hubble image. It's shown in green in this case to differentiate it. You're showing these beautiful dust lanes, some young stars, lots of beautiful stuff there. But the other kinds of light that we're seeing of the same galaxy, M51, which is known as the Whirlpool Galaxy, because it kind of looks like a whirlpool, you can see an X-ray light all the way down to the left. That is from the Chandrax Observatory. Now we're seeing things like exploding stars, X-ray binaries, which are like two stars dancing together, things like black holes, supermassive black holes in particular, also some like diffuse hot gas around there. And then when you go a little bit cooler than that and you're looking at it in ultraviolet from like the Galaxy telescope, now you're seeing like younger stars that are really kind of doing their thing. They're still throwing some temper tantrums at that age, and you're seeing that in the ultraviolet light. And then you scoot all the way over to the infrared, and now you're seeing that coolest gas and dust. You're kind of seeing down to like the bones of that galaxy. So all of those different kinds of light, they all give you a different piece of the puzzle. And the galaxy wouldn't be clear in any one kind of light. So having these invisible kinds of light to be able to study that object with are very important. And I think we might have a composite of what they look like together, or maybe not. But when you put them all together, then you're just getting a more complete picture of the universe. And it really is that idea that you need to have all of this invisible data to really make sense of the universe that we live in.
Yeah, I love that. I like the description of like the getting down to the bones of the galaxy for infrared. I'm going to have to start saying that.
Steal away.
So if we go back to that, the supernova remnant 3D print that DOS had put up, which type of, is that only representing X-ray emission? In this
So this is actually, what's really fun about the 3D printing project is that getting three-dimensional information of objects in our universe is kind of hard because we're here on Earth, and even our telescopes are really not that far. You know, Chandra goes a third of the way to the moon. That's far in human terms, but not far at all in general. And so it's kind of like the universe is this great giant TV screen in the sky in a way. So getting to understand which of the light is moving away from us and which of the light is moving towards us is challenging. And the scientists working on these data sets have worked very hard to be able to use observational data from telescopes like Chandra in this case, and then also mathematical models. So what we're looking at here is a 3D print of one supernova remnant called Tycho's supernova remnant, where the mathematical model has been constrained by the actual observations that Chandra has taken over quite a few years since it's been launched in 1999. And we're seeing all of the debris, the ejecta, on the left, which is the green, and on the right, the pink is kind of like how it models into the shockwave. And so you're having like all of these like fingers, these little nodules of this superheated X-ray gas, and you can start to break that down into the various kinds of chemical emission. Some of it is going to be silicon, calcium, etc. So it's pretty wonderful to have this kind of 3D print that you can explore very tactilely because it's a wonderful object.
Yeah, because I think we are used to seeing, I mean, I know we see supernova remnant pictures like Hubble ones and stuff like that, and none of them are, you know, perfect spheres or even sometimes symmetrical, but this is kind of ridiculous, the amount of surface texture or something.
Yes, ridiculous. I love that. Yeah, it is ridiculous. It's ridiculously wonderful.
Yeah, that's happening in space right now. Alicia, do you have a personal favorite wavelength?
Oh man, this is a dangerous question. I feel like you're setting me up.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I'm team multi-wavelength.
Yeah.
I'm not going to claim any. And actually, what Kimberly was saying, multi-wavelength observations make me think a lot about multimodal access. And Daz, I actually uploaded a picture, an example of a pulsar. and like the different ways that you can render pulsar data and represent them and convey them to someone. I think the file is called like multimodal.
There we go. It's the one that says pulsar in it.
It does, yeah. It's actually, I kind of cheated. It's a slide from my class, but it includes 4 different ways that you can demonstrate to students what a pulsar is doing as it's rotating, and you're getting this periodic signal. And there's an imaging way of rendering those data. There's a 2-dimensional plotting way of rendering those data. There's a 3D print that I pass around in class. And then it's a little hard to see, but there's a microphone on there. I didn't give you the audio file, but you can actually play the sound of it. It doesn't sound great. It sounds like some rapid clicking, but there are so many different ways. And it's another curb cut style example. If I have a student who even isn't disabled, there might be one way of presenting this information that clicks more with them, because all of our minds work differently. So it really does benefit everybody to come up with a large variety of ways to present these things.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I remember learning Italian at a community college once, but the teacher was very aware of like the different learning styles. Like some people are audio learners, so they listen for in a language like the sing-songness of the pronunciation, and other people are like kinetic learners, so she would have motion that would go with how you say or emphasize the thing. And you forget that that was in a context of a language, but it's really true, like no matter what subject you're talking about. So this is like such a great example, because I feel like maybe majority of all 3 of us, when we grew up, it really is like one way of teaching the material, and like this is how you learn it and you memorize it and that kind of a thing, versus really getting a feel for it or acknowledging that there's other ways to better understand it depending on how you approach it.
100%. I would say too. Oh, go ahead. No, okay.
I was just going to say, we have seen in publications, they're using a new EPUB 3 format so that you can interact with things differently. So instead of having 2-dimensional plots in papers, you can upload 3-dimensional models, and then people reading the paper can actually maneuver the model and see it from multiple sides.
Yeah, I love that. And especially like when you do, Excel will let you do like a plot with 3 axes, but there's no substitute for actually being able to rotate it physically in what you're seeing.
Yeah, exactly. Like these 3D models are being created for science. They are a product of the science research. And so making those scientific models accessible in more than one way is it's a really important part, I think, of like the scientific enterprise. Getting back to your comment, Summer, on the various like ways of learning, how different people are attracted to different kinds of information, how they make sense of information. We have found that these 3D prints, we take them everywhere. Like I literally carry one in my purse. So I am always prepared to talk about exploding stars in a tactile way, because you might have young kids that want to touch something. You might have a learner who just really wants to explore a tactile experience. You might have just all different people of all different backgrounds that can access this information in a new way. And I've just found, especially with the 3D prints, that it really opens up a conversation, right? When you talk about just something like scale, right? That this is a tiny, tiny version, right? Like one of the supernovas might be 40 million billion times the surface area of our sun, right? So we're talking of something scaled way, way down. But just being able to tactilely explore it, to take your time with it versus just looking at an image, right? Like the one behind me, right? It's like you have the benefit of time and a new sense, and you can just explore that data in a whole new way. Like I have learned things about the data sets that I've worked on when I hold them or when I listen to them. And I love that, I've been looking at this data for a very long time. So being able to learn something new about it because I'm exploring it tactilely or because I'm listening to a sonification of it, I think is just a wonderful example of how these multimodal experiences can just be very, very educational in different ways than you might expect.
Yeah, speaking of scale, what was the scale of the 3D print that we were looking at, the Tycho one before?
Or like that's around, That one's around, I think, about 30 million billion times the surface area of our sun. So, and it was only like 5 inches, I think, in human size. So obviously scaled way, way down. Very, very tiny, tiny, a little blip on what the object actually is.
Yeah. I love that you carry the supernova remnants around with you. That's perfect. So what about the other mode that you've sort of been translating some of these images into, which is the sonification?
Yeah, the sonification is something that I had started experimenting with maybe like late 2017, 2018, perhaps with some students at our lab, because we were working on taking some of these 3D data sets and bringing them into virtual reality. And as soon as we did that, we lost the accessibility that we had gained with a 3D print. And yes, you could always have a 3D print next to a VR headset, but I just wanted to explore more. And so we started like attaching essentially a geospatial sound to this object. In this case, it was Cassiopeia A. So that if you're in the virtual reality experience and you can find the neutron star, the leftover core in the center, and you can find the pocket of iron like out along the perimeter, right? And the iron used to be inside that core of the star. So a star like that essentially blows itself inside out. To learn that, I think it was really exciting in virtual reality, but then we were leaving colleagues who were blind or low vision behind. So being able to add the sound was just another way to make sure that emerging technology was still accessible. And then the pandemic hit, and VR became difficult, 3D printing became difficult, and so I looked for ways to make data sonification easier and faster. And I started working with some colleagues at System Sounds, Matt Russo and Andrew Santaguida. We had met at a conference a few years prior, and they had been doing a sonification of systems like the TRAPPIST system of exoplanets. And we sat down and just started working through some of the most important objects to me that Chandra had ever looked at. And we came up with some of these examples. So I think we'll maybe play one of them. We're going to play Tycho. So we've already seen the 3D print for the Tycho supernova remnant. Now we're going to listen to it. Now, this is not holding a microphone up to the sky kind of sound. This is a data sonification, which is just a translation of that light. It's just a translation of that data that we've captured. So the data that comes to us, it streams down to us in the form of binary code. We unpack that binary code and then we create a table, and eventually we might create, say, an image. But we don't have to just create the image, right? We can take that data and translate it another step further. We can translate that data into sound. So each pixel in the image is mathematically mapped into a sound bed. And so in this case, the X-ray that you'll hear, it's a really lovely sound. You've got the optical that you're going to hear. It plays like a soft harp. And hopefully you'll hear the texture of this expanding debris field as we play it. And then I'll talk a little more about it.
And for the viewers, I'd love some feedback. We're going to play the sound for you, but if it's too low, please tell me in chat and we can do it again and make sure y'all can hear this. But here we go. Let's see what we got.
That's incredible. I kind of want that in
It
my
really is.
Calm app to fall asleep to.
Me too. Yeah. So what you're hearing those two distinct layers. In the high energy layer, the X-ray layer, what's happening is the pitch is indicating the color of light under this expanding circle, right? So the redder light is producing those lower notes. The sort of bluish violet light that we're capturing is producing the higher notes. And then other colors are sort of in between those. Then we're also hearing that optical layer, which is this beautiful mapping into a harp. And what I like about that is you hear all of this intensity as you're scanning out from the center point of that region all the way out to the end of that debris field, right to the very perimeter where the shock is. And then there's a very strong drop as soon as that X-ray information is over. And then you're just back to like that softness of stars. You're just listening to the surrounding star field. And it's, to me, it's a very expressive way to talk about a very violent phenomena that's happening in the central region, right? That supermassive star that exploded its guts all over the place, you know, stellar vomit, if you will, and it's expanding out at this incredible rate. And then it just stops and you're back to that sort of peacefulness that's outer space. So yeah, I really love the way this is expressed.
And am I right that, you know, sometimes when we have artistic renderings of things in space, they're not there's choices that are made to help communicate what you're trying to communicate. So did you guys land on like those particular instruments or sounds to really emphasize that you could hear both wavelengths and like tell that you're running out of one and that there's the extra of both of them in the middle? Am I saying that right? Sort of.
Yes. So like with the 3D prints, we work with people who are blind or low vision to create these. Yeah. And the most important thing, I think, that we've learned, well, two things. One thing that we learned is the sound must be differentiated enough. So it has to be very clear what the layers are that you're working with, meaning having too much sound that's jumbled together can be very hard for someone who's just listening to understand what the scientific story is. And then also the speed. You don't want to have it too fast, because if you're deep listening, you're really listening, and you want to have enough time to be able to process through that data in a way that adds value and that lets you add meaning. So back to your other question, just like we're creating images, this is data that is essentially invisible. And so whether you paint your car red or you paint your car blue, the supernova remnant doesn't care. The car doesn't care, right? We typically assign colors that make sense for the science. So higher energy colors will typically be the blues and the purples, and the lower energies will typically be the reds, for example. But it's always about being authentic to the scientific story that's being told. Of course, realizing that all this data is invisible that we're working with. And the same thing with the sound. So we try to make sure the sound is authentic to the story that's being told, that it will be descriptive in a way that makes sense. So again, with what we just listened to, that sort of synthesized sound that's careening out as you scan through that debris field has a very textured sound. And then the stars, they're just pinpoints of light. So that plucking of a harp, right, is meant to sort of help showcase that sort of pluckiness of the light. So it is an artistic choice, but it's also mathematically mapped. So all of the data is being represented and in a particular way. But yes, there's going to be styles that can be chosen.
Yeah.
Real quick, can I jump in?
Yes, please.
Chat, or the folks in chat want to know if we can play this again. Should we play this one again? I think we have a couple others. Yeah. Let's play this one. They really want to listen to this one again.
Play another. Okay, go ahead.
But we have a couple to play, I think, right?
Great.
Yeah, but go for this one again.
Okay.
Give them what you want.
Here we go. We'll replay this one, and then y'all tell us about the other ones that I can play for them. Here we go. have to wait for that last pluck with the echo behind it there. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kim, is this, I'm realizing just for clarification, since I know that you did the 3D printing with a mathematical model, this sonification is just of the 2D image data?
Exactly. So during the pandemic, what we found is waiting just for the perfect 3D data set was hard. So being able to translate two-dimensional data in this way made a lot of sense. Oddly enough, though, this image that we were just showing, the two-dimensional image actually has three-dimensional data in it. So it's color-coded by depth, if you will, by Z. It's the blue shifted and the red shifted colors that you're seeing. So the blues are representing what's coming towards us. The reds are showing what's moving away from us. So we've tried to replicate that information in the 2D image. But yes, the scan itself is just of the two-dimensional data. We've done sonifications of 3D data, and they're definitely useful because, again, it's all about like equity and making sure these things are accessible. But I will say that so far, the results with 3D data that's been sonified is just, it's very complex to listen to. So I don't think we've quite perfected that yet. No.
which one do we want next? I've got M16. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to ask a quick question. It might be a little tangent, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on this. But given what Alicia, you were talking about with data, and with the papers and accessibility of that, and then Kim with this, and we were talking about the choice of colors or the choice of instruments and things like that, it's making me realize how non-standard across probably different wavelengths, but also different subfields of astronomy, color schemes are. Like, I always tell people, like, you have to look at the caption, because you can't make assumptions based on the colors that you're seeing, because different people will choose different ones to represent what data they're trying to convey. But it almost makes me think that maybe, in all of our spare time collectively, that maybe astronomy should think about more some sort of cohesiveness, because in a way that's an accessibility thing for the public to be able to understand our work. So a lot of times we're putting out those images or those really pretty things, but then they're grasping onto one and trying to apply that scale or that mapping of something to another. So that was just a thought to throw out.
Yeah, we could go
sorry.
Sorry, I keep doing that. You go for cohesiveness.
No, you go.
At least allow people to manipulate what they're looking at. Give them file formats that they can adjust things. You can adjust fonts. For instance, if you're dyslexic, you can adjust colors. We're just starting to convince folks that we should be more colorblind aware when making figures. Like that's a really huge problem still that we've been working on. But yeah, so either cohesion or manipulable things across different platforms.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, I agree. We're actually just about to launch a colorblind survey to sort of study that a little bit more quantitatively, to be able to understand how these images can be either better done or better expressed. Because I think the one project that I wasn't sure if it would be brought up, but visual descriptions have actually turned out to be one of the most important methods of creating content that are accessible, particularly for blind and low vision communities, but also for all different kinds of non-experts, experts, you name it, because a rich visual description will give a very incredible amount of detail on what it is that you're seeing, which is great because it makes any image accessible, and that's wonderful. But what we've also been finding is that it helps people who are, say, more non-expert, because it's like having a little astronomer sitting on your shoulder, kind of pointing out the things that are happening in the image. It's just a more detailed way of understanding what's in that image. And it'll talk about color, and it'll talk about the different features that are being showcased in that data set, for example. And so visual descriptions we found to be helpful with colorblind communities, with neurodivergent learners, with people of all different kinds of perspectives and backgrounds, as a very important tool to being more inclusive.
Yeah, that is such a good point. Alicia, when you're teaching, what kind of things are you bringing in the classroom or changing how you present either the material or the actual data to make them as accessible as possible for your students?
Well, I'm doing a lot, like you saw a slide from one of my actual classes. So
Yeah.
I will try to represent an idea in as many different formats as I possibly can. If I can bring in tactile models, physical things. Actually, Doss, I have a picture of me holding up some yarn that I stole from my stash to make a demonstration. And I try to be kind of radically accessible in the classroom. They have the slides in advance of class so they can follow along at their station, at their desk, at their seat, whatever. I turn on captioning, so it's not the best because it's the automatic thing, but I'm trying. We're trying. And I always record lectures. One of the things about accessibility and providing accommodation is understanding that people get sick. Sometimes it's a difficult day to even get out of bed. So I still have my classes online so students can join from wherever. They can watch the recording whenever. They have the captions available to them. And then the actual presentation of ideas is through as many formats as I can get my grubby little hands on.
Alicia,
Speaking of your hands, what are you doing in this photo?
Oh, so I'm describing a magnetic field emerging on the sun. And what I'm trying to demonstrate with the different colors of yarn is the way that the field gets twisted. And you can picture the field lines themselves holding energy, storing energy in the twist of the field. And then I'm taking that yarn and I'm moving it at different orientations that you can see. If you saw it from the side, it would look kind of like a lumpy arcade. If you saw it from top down, it would look like a little kind of Greek letter sigma type shape. So that sort of thing.
Okay, I'm also stealing that because that's really cool. And that's a great way to talk about the magnetic fields when I talk about radio jets.
Yeah.
So what a cool, I like it. We need to talk more. It's
definitely.
So I think I'm hearing from you, Doss, that the chat wants to hear some more space.
I'm going to have a riot on my hands. The number one chat is I would like, well, some people would actually like to be in your class, Alicia, with the different ways you're demonstrating things. But which one should I play? I've got M16. Just hop to that one. Or we've got a Sonify M51. Sure. Perseus is in there. Let's just go M16, shall we?
Let's do it.
What did we just hear?
We just heard baby stars forming. So this is a very famous image, which is why I had wanted to work particularly on this one with my colleagues. M16, the Pillars of Creation, Eagle Nebula, depending how you want to call it, how you want to frame it. We have two different kinds of lights in this image. So we have these tall pillars of gas and dust that are showcased from the Hubble Space Telescope. And then in the background, we have some sort of delicate pinpoints of light. These are young stars that we're picking up in mostly X-ray light that are young and tempestuous and kind of having these little temper tantrums, right? So with this one, we know the basic 3D structure of those tall columns of gas and dust. I want to say the tallest pillar is maybe 4 light years tall, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but so they're not terribly huge in astronomical sizes. And tucked inside those tall columns of gas and dust are new stars waiting to be formed or making their way in through formation. And we kind of understand how these pillars are curved and separated. So it was important with the sonification, where we're sweeping from left to right, that the sort of texture, the clumpiness, the dustiness of that optical data be clear and stand out from those little cranky young stars having a party in the background, right? So those very different tones that you're hearing, the sort of, beep and boop of the X-ray light, and then that synthesized sound as you're scaling across the pillars of gas and dust in the optical light are meant to be very distinct. And so hopefully that is the case. So I don't know if we want to listen to it perhaps one more time, but what I do try to recommend for anyone who's a little new to sonification is to close your eyes and try just listening without a visual and see if any of the things that I've said come across to you a little differently. So we want to try that.
We'll get it playing one more time here. Let's see. Did everyone hear the young, cranky stars?
Das, are there actual other questions from chat that people would like to ask of Kim?
Well, mostly.
Besides joining their class and hearing more of this cool stuff.
What other sonifications do we have to play? I've got a spiral galaxy here queued up if we'd like to do the spiral galaxy. Are we cool with doing the spiral galaxy, or we want to mix it up some?
I'm cool with it. And I can add that the spiral galaxy was one that we already looked at earlier in the 4 different kinds of light. I believe that's the one. It's M51, right? That we have queued up.
Yes.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, right. So in this one, so I'm a former choir and band geek here. And this one I particularly like because it speaks to the choir lover in me. And now
sorry.
That's it.
That one started out of the gate a little fast there. The choir lover in you, I apologize.
I mean, it's perfect time. So what we're going to listen to now, those 4 kinds of lights that I talked about earlier, we're going to be going from the highest energy will be the absolute highest soprano you can imagine. The sort of slightly lower than that, the ultraviolet light, will be a very high alto, I guess. And then the optical light will be your tenor, and the infrared lights will be your bass. Now, these are all very dramatic singers, if you will. So we're talking true divas here. But you're going to hear as we do a radar scan through it, you'll hear these little moments where you can hear a little solo of the X-ray that's super high, super duper high soprano. And those are, again, if you want to recall from what I said earlier, the black holes, the exploded stars, the X-ray binaries, the 2 stars dancing together, and some really hot gas. And then you'll hear probably all the way down to that softer bass note that's kind of zooming into the bones of the galaxy in the infrared. So again, I would perhaps close your eyes and take a listen, but this is like a choral galaxy gone wild.
And I will manage the audio volume there, y'all. Apparently the opera jumping in all of a sudden was a little loud for some people, so we'll find the right level for this. Here we go.
Now, is that what do you want to call, like, artificial? Is that synthesized, or was that actual choral singing?
It's synthesized choral, I guess you would say,
Yeah.
Which is nice because one of the great things with sonification in that it's digital, we have all of the world's violinists, singers,
Yeah.
percussionists, flautists,
Yeah. Just at your
synthesizers,
fingertips.
right, at our disposal.
Mhm. But now I'm having an idea that you should have put on a concert with like a
So
real.
we might do that.
Is that already in the works? Is that a spoiler?
There is something in the works very, very related to that. Yes, I'm very excited about it, but I can't talk about it quite yet. So
That's okay. That's okay. But Alicia, you do like planet formation and magnetic fields and stars and stuff. I feel like there's also some good synergy here. That could be
Yeah,
really
those temper tantrum stars are my crew.
your crew, your favorites.
Something that's really been exciting to me is I've been seeing publications that are sort of trying to validate sonification within the professional community as a legitimate way that we can derive information and answers and analyze these data. So I'm thinking, I was listening to it, the little look on my face was like, what if we were all trained in how to do this from when we enter the field?
Yeah.
Figure out maybe in a two-dimensional image, what we'll have to do is have a little tactile soundboard where you can play a cut that's through a row of pixels or through a column of pixels or something. And it would be amazing if we were all able to, readily do this.
Oh, I so agree with that. Because again, going back to my friend Wanda, like her PhD thesis was essentially showcasing that we can learn to become better listeners. And I, again, have looked at these images and then I listen to them. And because you're given the gift of time in a sonification, you're not just given, this entire image to look at once. You're given the gift of time. And so it just makes you think of the data differently. It makes you process the data differently. And so there are true scientific points to doing this as well. Variable stars, I think, being a great example, right? You can look at plot after plot after plot of a variable star, but when you can listen to them, you can process through that data a little deeper and a little faster, I think. But yeah, I agree that we need to professionalize, I think, the value soon. It would be great if we do that right now.
Yeah, Wanda is also a co-founder of our working group. So I've had a lot of conversations with her about this. And it was one of her deeper frustrations that it took so long to prove its worth to her colleagues.
You're making me think that now I want to sonify like the active radio galaxy ones with jets, because there's a lot of questions about have they been turned off and on often, so that they'll have like multiple little shocks. But there's probably ways where you could get like below the noise of maybe the visual image to better understand like where those different turn off and turn off on points might be. So
I've got a quick comment from chat here. Don was saying that it'd be a very cool kids learning tool to get toddlers interested in learning science. I could see like playing these sonifications over and over, and then when they grow up, they're like, I really love astronomy, and I'm not sure why.
I do think that there's a power to music in general. Sound and music have a stickiness to them almost, right? They can evoke emotion almost. And though that probably sounds like the antithesis of what science should be about, I disagree. I don't see science as a cold, sterile thing, right? I really want to be invested in these exploding stars. I want to be their good friends. I want to have emotion over these data sets because I don't know, that's for me, a life worth living is having those kinds of feelings. And so we did a study of about 4,500 people with these sonifications and tried to quantify that, and both people who are blind, people who are sighted. And one of the interesting outputs of that study was the fact that the sound offered a path to an emotional connection to something that seems so giant or so complex or so distant, right? And I think that's a very useful tool to have, particularly for young learners who are just beginning to explore the world around them, never mind the universe around them, having sound as another tool in your pocket to explore, to me is very worthwhile. And then, how many future scientists might come out of that, from different communities that never thought they could have those access points before. I don't know. That's my dream, at least.
No, I think that's absolutely the case. And I feel like that's behind a lot of the transition or the movement that some people have now from STEM to STEAM. Because I always try to just emphasize that the act of doing science is creative, and you need creativity, even if it's going to be like that boring, sterile science that we kind of were taught. It still does require the creativity of coming up with what is the question we're trying to answer? How are we going to try and answer that? Let alone how to come at it from completely different ways, like you two are talking about, whether it's like some kinetic physical model or whether it's sonification, or just anything that's a different inroad to coming at the problem. We need all the inroads possible. Come at it from every direction. Any other questions piling up besides more sound?
Basically, how can I be in Alicia's class? Was another question that came through here. That was actually a question. I'm kidding. I have these.
Move to North Carolina, right? Is the first part.
There you go. I have the sonification of Perseus queued up if we want to listen through that one real quick, shall we?
Sure.
All right, here we go. Let's see what the volume level is on this one. There you go. You know what I find myself doing? Like as it goes around, I'm seeing the sort of scan line go, right? And as the scan line moves, I see little dots and I'm like, I wonder what sound that's going to make. And then I'm listening for it. I'd never do that. I'd be like, oh, there's a dot on the side of the screen. Big deal, right? And with this, it almost enforces me to experience it over time. Right? As it sort of guides me around the image, and then I notice things in the image that I wouldn't normally notice, and I wonder like, oh, what's that going to do? What's that going to do as it goes? So it's really cool, different way to experience things.
I love hearing that. What you just said is perfect. That's
Nice.
exactly what I want to hear. That's really exciting. So this one, just to explain for folks who are listening that want to know a little bit more, this one's a bit of a special case, an aberration perhaps, but definitely a special case. This is the Perseus cluster of galaxies, and there is a very massive, supermassive black hole at the core. And it is burping out into the hot gas around it. And that's causing these pressure waves, which are sound waves. And a researcher that we worked with back in 2003, Andy Fabian, had actually calculated that sound wave is a B flat, about 57 octaves below middle C. So the deepest note in the universe that had been detected. And I think has been since, but perhaps. And so this diva of a supermassive black hole is having like a true, opera moment out there, but the sound is so low, humans obviously can't hear it directly. We are too far from it as well. There's no medium between us and it, so that we could never hear this for real. This is, again, no microphone up to the sky. But knowing what that B flat is, that note is, and how many octaves low it is, and having in the image the evidence of those sound waves, it's those ripples that we're seeing in the data, we can take that and mathematically map it and bring the B flat back up 57 or so octaves so that humans can hear it. And so in this one, it's interesting because we were trying to very authentically represent a sound that already existed, but existed on a much bigger level than, our puny human beings can handle. And so hearing this note for the first time, this was very exciting to me because I always just loved this science story. And Perseus is not the only supermassive black hole that's burping out there in the universe. Others like M87 are doing this as well. And depending on the area around that black hole, how much stuff is around it, how active that black hole is, how big that black hole is, all of that affects what potential sound wave might be created from that object. So I think this one was very exciting because I think it brought data sonification to a very large new audience for the first time as a truly descriptive tool. This one went viral. A friend of ours had posted it on a slow news Saturday kind of thing. And the press statistics on it, I think, were about 2 billion people could potentially have been exposed to this sound. And this to me was very exciting because the idea that a sonification that had been created for and with people who are blind or low vision had made such an impact on a larger percentage of, planet Earth's population, and showcase the value of this as a tool was just perfection. So yeah, that's the story behind it. Sorry, I tend not to do very short sound bites. I tend to talk a lot. Apologies.
That's okay. I remember when that came out because Fabian was at the Institute of Astronomy and I was starting grad school in Cambridge at the cabinet.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I also remember that because those waves and stuff, those are the X-ray shocks. So they are outside of where the gaps is where the radio emission is for the Perseus cluster. So it all comes back to the multi-wavelength.
It does. It does.
But I remember that. I mean, it got picked up by so many different news sources, print, online, everything. And so that was a really exciting time. Kind of.
It really was. Yeah, just showcase that power. Exactly.
Yeah. So we've been talking about multi-wavelength and multimodal. And it's kind of making me think, even though this is still a bit within the data realm of multi-messenger astronomy, which is kind of starting to explode now with detecting gravitational waves and having the recent news of the pulsar timing array. Did you guys hear about that? So now instead of having a gravitational wave ripple through the fabric of space-time and push mirrors away from each other on Earth, it's pushing Earth radio telescopes away from nearby pulsars that we know their locations so well that space is expanding, and now telling us more about that there's a background of gravitational waves in the universe, which is also just kind of bonkers. And so I feel that we're all headed in this direction of getting as much information as possible and finding out new ways of getting it. Even it used to just be what more light can we get? And now it's what more messengers can we get? And maybe also, how can we look at the data differently? It's kind of a fun time to be in astronomy now.
Let's say one tiny thing that's lagging that our working group is also pushing is with the proliferation of terabytes upon terabytes of data, we're finding that the way that they're being shared online is not accessible in all kinds of different ways, either in the file name or the website that you have to use to access. There are tiny boxes that you have to click to select a certain file. If you have any kind of mobility challenges, that's going to be extremely hard. And so people with disabilities are still relying on sighted, non-disabled folks to get and prepare data for them. And that's a really, really big barrier to access. We need independent ability to access this stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing I did want to ask both of you is sort of what's sort of the active front or multiple fronts that you're really working on now, or that you're looking to work on next in both your respective areas of making everything more accessible.
So within the society, it's publications, databases, and meetings. Those are the three fronts on which we're simultaneously working to expand access.
Do you think the meetings, I know, sir, during COVID, the meetings went to being first all virtual, but then hybrid. Are they hopefully going to continue in some hybrid format? Because not everyone can travel.
Too expensive, we've been told, and I'm extremely disappointed.
Yeah.
But yeah, the next January meeting will not have any online component whatsoever that I'm aware of.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure
I've also been hearing that there's not enough people participating in hybrid formats to make it worth the cost, which is very depressing to me. I have a very hard time traveling. I have health issues sometimes, and
same.
To know that I had hybrid options has been wonderful. And to know that that is going away makes it almost harder, because it looked like we were marching towards something that was making it a lot easier for me, who, just on my daily basis, like I can easily go to this meeting. And to know that that is less of an option now is just a bit depressing. Yeah.
It's like the crux of what frustrates me about accessibility is very often you have to justify it in terms of, well, how many people actually need it? But the problem is, if you don't have the people in the room to tell you what they need, you can't count them. So we have this chicken and egg thing. My colleague Jackie Monkevich frequently quotes Field of Dreams and says, if we build it, they will come. If we make an accessible space, then the people that we aren't able to count right now will be there.
Yeah. And I feel like on one hand, there's that thing about forcing people to self-identify, which sometimes is not a comfortable thing for them. But also, the talking about them saying that it was too expensive and not enough people were coming. I mean, I think we're still talking about like n equals 3 or something as well. Like that's not enough examples of this, if it's there long term. Yeah, you always need more than 3 data points for anything, right?
Right. And what we found within the working group was when we surveyed the AAS membership and asked about identify disabilities, the questions used to be very narrow. They were, are you deaf or hard of hearing? Do you have to use a mobility aid? And I think there might have been a question on there about vision, but I don't think so. So when we expanded the survey, we got a lot more respondents saying things like, I am neurotypical. I identify as having mental health needs for accommodations, things like that. And then there's still so much stigma that national surveys find there are actually more people who would federally be identified as disabled than who personally identify as disabled. So we just have to build it for everybody is the answer.
Exactly.
Like whether you want to acknowledge it or not.
Exactly. And again, it's the cut curve effect when you have hybrid meetings that are easier for parents with young kids, for example, or more senior people that can't easily travel anymore, whatever it might be, right? Like it's without having to make everybody ask, because like I tend not to ask because I don't see my health issues as serious enough to warrant it almost, right? But 9 times out of 10, if I'm given the option to be virtual, I will choose it because that is so much easier for me. But there is definitely this perception of the weakness of it, right? And that is a horrible thing to overcome. Whereas if you just make it standard for everybody, then nobody has to worry about that. So yeah, it's challenging.
Yeah, I think I remember within the last couple of years, conferences in general, and I think AAS also having like the quiet room available, which is something I never would have asked for, but I appreciate so much that existence of that. And now I'm like, oh yes, I like this. I would like to have this at future meetings. So yeah. Kim, besides things that you can't talk about, what are some other exciting things you're looking to do next, or just further steps with what you're already doing?
Yeah, I think besides that stuff, I am looking to just keep moving it and keep doing it, right? Because it's like you get hooked once you start, you can't just then stop. And I so appreciate all of the new perspectives, all of the new information, all of the, new colleagues that I've been able to gather because of these projects. So yes, we intend to keep doing the visual descriptions as a definite primary product. We're hoping to go back in time and add visual descriptions for more of our data sets, since Gender had been launched. We are definitely hoping to keep moving the Sonification project forward and to keep doing 3D modeling and 3D printing. And I think one day I just kind of hope of having researchers in various countries. Maybe one is in Japan, maybe one is in here, and they're working in real time in 3D with sonification across, different kinds of barriers and being able to think of their data differently. I just think there's so much power and potential in that.
That's
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you were talking, or y'all were talking about the sonification, and there was a question in chat from Gwen asking if there were any international standards on this yet that ensures the same image produces the same sonification wherever you're introduced to it. It feels like it's more of a, here are some ideas that we're coming up with. It's not to the level of everyone sonify it this way and it always gives the same result, right? I think that would be for Kimberly.
Sure. Yeah. So there are groups that have been working on sonification and standardization as, important issues of research for quite some time. For us, this is more of a bespoke process right now. So I have been working with my students on a very simple sonification app that lets you do a sonification left to right of any image that, any astronomical image that is in the database or that you might upload. And so that would give an immediate, like, one-to-one relation between data and sound. It's a very simple sound file. It's nothing like, descriptive or anything like that. It's just essentially to scan an image and get some sound. But being able to have some kind of standardization, I think, would definitely be useful. But also, for me at least, at this point in time, I still need room for the creative aspect of it, because just like the images that we color, so like the one behind me, for example, if we're colorizing an image, typically we do like a red, green, blue, low, medium, high kind of color assignment, if you will, that kind of mimics vision, if you will. It's a familiar thing. It tends to work out, but unfortunately, every scientific data set is not the same. Every scientific story that we have can't be delivered exactly the same. So sometimes what we try to do, right, of a red, green, blue assignment for an image just does not work. Perhaps the data set is showcasing different chemical emissions from an exploded star, and you have to use 5 different colors to be able to communicate silicon, iron, calcium, argon, neon, whatever, right? Those scientific stories still have to be communicated in a way that's very authentic and true to the science. So the absolute standardization is a difficult concept for us at this time. Maybe something will iron itself out in the future. But at this time, having an absolute standard to adhere to is not necessarily conducive to the science itself or the data set itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes good sense. It's this sort of looking at it. It's interesting. It's good that there are people working on thinking that way, like standards, so that it can be more widespread, because you can scale it then, right? When there's a standard that everybody just follows, but it really is a creative process right now. I think, like, what do you do to convey this differently? So I think that answer makes perfect sense. Summer, I'll keep looking for a couple more questions in chat. If you have a question, put a couple of questions in chat. It helps me if you tag on the NASA Spaceflight channel at NASA Spaceflight, and I'll grab a couple questions there. But y'all keep going, and I will look for some questions.
All right, sounds good. I wanted to actually mention someone that I think both of you probably know fairly well, but I'm forgetting what her institution is, but Karen Masters, and doing some of the it's also tactile, but it's more just like raised depictions of different morphologies of galaxies or other things like that. Somewhere in England, right? Where is she at? I forget. It's in Manchester or Brighton or Bristol. But like that stuff's really interesting. And I wish I'd brought it into the office today, but I recently received a book that's like that with for visually impaired with Braille, but also with raised depictions for eclipses, which I really would like to sort of, I think it was put together with, I'm going to blank on the group.
The Tactile Universe, maybe? Is it that one?
Yeah, that's probably it.
Yep. So we've actually worked with Nick Bond, who is an astronomer in the UK, who is also blind. And he wrote this amazing software that essentially lets you translate two-dimensional images to tactile plates. So we are using that API for our images. So every time we release an image, not like an illustration, but an image, we'll have a 3D printable tactile plate that we create of it based on the API that he created with his research and his partners. And it's a wonderful way because I think I mentioned earlier how challenging it is to get 3D data sets. Like that kind of quality data is tough to get. And so I was always frustrated with the pace of those outputs. The pace of getting new 3D prints of a 3D model because it's hard. And so this program working with Nick has been fantastic because now it's a simple process. You're just spitting out. We do have to make sure we like pay attention to the details because just an auto output is not necessarily going to be, say, the highest tactile quality that you might need in order to feel the difference between a layer of gas and a couple bumps in the optical data or whatever it might be. So you do have to pay attention to the details of it. You still have to test it. You still have to work with people who are blind or low vision to make sure that that data output makes sense. But it gives us such a faster way to be able to create these 3D printable plates. And they're lovely expressions of the data. It's to be able to feel a stellar nursery, to be able to feel the textures in a merging galaxy, to be able to feel the donut shape of the first image of a black hole shadow, right? Those experiences, they're valuable for everybody. Like there's value in that exploration. And so being able to use his software to create those more easily has been an absolute gift. I'm such a fan.
Yeah, we should mention so then that people know they can go to Tactile Universe and probably find some of these resources. And Kim, doesn't Chandra actually make available some of the 3D printing files for the objects?
Everything that I've talked about. Yes, everything that I've talked about, you can go to chandra.si.edu and you can get the sonifications, you can get the visual descriptions, you can get the 3D models and the 3D plates. All of the OBJ files for 3D printing are all available online. We're publicly funded. And so that is something that we pay very specific attention to for additional access points.
Now, are there any SoundCloud accounts out there that have taken some of your sonifications and like made some really cool tracks from them?
Yes, actually we had so NASA has a SoundCloud that's really cool. So you can go to the NASA SoundCloud. I think you'll enjoy it. But also we had a record label take the sonifications and create a vinyl record and a CD. So and I have to say, I was never a sound snob before, but having listened to the sonifications on my husband's turntable for the first time just blew my mind. Like the quality was so good. It was so warm and rich. And I don't know, there was just such texture to the sound. So yeah, that was a major gift. We don't earn any money from that. That's a private thing, but just being able to listen to these sonifications in very true, rich ways like that is really lovely.
Yeah, and it's almost making me think that a vinyl version of a sonification is almost also like on a very small scale, a tactile universe, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, in a way, it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And real folks, for everybody watching, I did put a link to treasure.si.edu in chat. So if you click on that, you can go over there and get more information like Kimberly was just talking about. Just click that link, and right there on the main page, you can see a link to more sonifications and videos and that sort of stuff that's been released. So there's that clickable link.
Awesome, Das. Any other questions?
There aren't a lot of questions, actually, here. A lot of people saying thank you so much to the guests and interpreters for making the show here today possible. And I mean, it's that sort of message over and over again. Just wanted to thank all of you. This has been fascinating and hopeful for the future of all folks interested in astronomy. Quite a few messages like that coming through. Not a lot of questions.
That's okay. Alicia, I know that you also knit. Have you done knitting in the realm of astronomy or data ever?
I have started a constellation shawl. So there are some people who have mapped segments of the night sky. That's not what I have in my lap right now, but I really should do it more. It's such a slow process to go from start to finish, and there's so much other stuff to do. I wanted to bring back this idea of slowing down. I think both Das and Kimberly had said this at some point, like it really having to listen and watch as you're sweeping around the image makes you really slow down and appreciate it more and in a different way. And I think science would really do well to take this idea of slowing down to heart. I find that we have this pace, this publish or perish, get the papers out, get it done, get the results. And that's a big part of what leaves a lot of people behind. I don't know if you want to show this graphic, Das. I included a slide that has some data for disabled students in STEM. It's slide disability unemployment.
Got it.
Okay.
I can certainly
don't want to bring
that.
the bummer vibes at the very, very end, but I really do want to underscore the urgency with which we act and deploy these things so that this pie chart doesn't look like this anymore. But it's basically showing from the undergraduate level to the graduate level to the doctorate level, we are just losing disabled students very, very quickly. That little black wedge getting smaller and smaller of that pie. So I wish everybody would slow down and prioritize really exploring their data in these ways. It makes you a better scientist. It makes you spend more time with what you're looking at. You can catch mistakes. You can figure out better ways to present an idea. We really need to slow down.
I feel like that's actually could be a cool topic for like we often at the astronomy meetings have like the hackathon, but it's also I know an aspect of it has turned into more of a maker space as well. But you could almost think like let's add an element of that, even though the idea is to do something in that day, but the idea of still like slowing down, but thinking of some other way that you could interact with the data or create a way to present the data in that space. It might be a fun way to add another element or facet to the hackathons.
I've got
and you have your knitting. I've recently discovered that there are cross stitch patterns that people have made of like supernova remnants and other nebulae, which essentially is like a pixelated version, which they all are created originally with pixels. And I feel like that would be an interesting way to kind of also slow down, but really think about what that image is showing as you're completing the cross stitch. And yeah.
I've always secretly hoped someone would gift me one of those because I used to knit, but my hands don't have as much mobility, unfortunately. So I can't knit anymore. But I adore fabric arts. And so when I see such beautiful pieces online, I just, secretly hope someone will gift me one day. They're so lovely.
Listening to you right now. So maybe.
Yes, maybe that plea was too obvious.
There's really something to be said here. So, Summer, you were talking a minute ago about, I think you were talking about Karen's work rendering two-dimensional plots, like almost making a plot in Braille, kind of. And I investigated that with some accessibility experts here, and we found that the resolution of the human finger was kind of the limiting factor. You had to really blow things up. And it was difficult to keep track of a numerical axis at the same time as you're following things. So now I'm picturing like needle felting or some kind of fiber art where you can make something big and really textured and really, yeah, there would be a lot of artist license to take in there. But maybe you could program an embroidery machine or something to do something like that. Okay, now I have my next project. Thanks, y'all.
Well, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, and you know what you were just saying too reminded me, and this is maybe like way out there, but who knows? You got to think of the things that are out there as well. But that the resolution like of the neurons, the touch neurons in our fingers are so low. But I know that that's why babies, when they're trying to figure stuff out, they put it in their mouth because it's so much denser on the tongue. So now, what if there's edible plots?
I would not want like a lollipop of Tico's supernova rim. That would be difficult. That would be painful.
Yeah, I know. Taste and smell are the two areas where I start. No.
The lollipop would be shaped like this somewhat. That looks a little tough on the, yeah.
That I could get behind. That'd be fun.
Well, we already have rock candy, so that's not that.
That's true. Fine.
It's literally
that could easily be a rock. You could make a rock candy version of that.
It could.
Literally becomes Taste the Rainbow at that point.
Exactly.
That would be fun.
Taste the wavelengths.
Taste the wavelengths. Well, folks, let's see here. I do believe that we are coming up on the end of our time for the show today. It's an hour and a half. Like, we book guests, and we're like, oh, what are we going to talk about for an hour and a half, 90 minutes? And then 90 minutes goes by, and it's like, oh, it's time for the show to be over here at 4:30 Eastern Time. But Kimberly, Alicia, thank you so much for joining us here today. This really was a cool thing to learn about.
Thank you.
Thanks. It was fun.
All right, we got so many nice comments from chat just saying, I didn't know that this was a thing, or this is such a great idea, or more people need to know about this. And let me say this to the viewers as well. Like, the folks that are watching now, we show all sorts of different things on our channels, especially over at NASA Spaceflight. And sometimes there's all these people watching and whatever. But the folks here now, y'all truly are the ones who care about making this accessible to everybody. So thank you for watching today and learning about this. Take the message, spread the website around. This will be available as a VOD in all the different places. So if you want to link to some people, I saw somebody saying that they want to share this stream with their curriculum department to have some ideas about ways that they can increase the accessibility there in their curriculum. Please, the VOD is available. You can link it straight to people. You can even link to specific parts of the video to share a specific concept or something like that. So the folks here that have shown such big heart caring about this topic, please share it out far and wide so more people can learn about these initiatives to make astronomy more accessible. Just thank you so much. Summer, this was a fantastic show. Thank you so much for walking through the conversation here today as well.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm even more excited. I knew both of them did amazing work, but it was really cool to be able to go into more depth and find out the new and exciting things too that they're both looking at doing next.
Yep. Absolutely. Folks, also remember that the shows here, they're made possible, supported through a NASA cooperative agreement awarded to the New York Space Grant Consortium. But also today, y'all were a big part of making the show possible. It was the first time that we did a fundraiser for the museum on one of the shows, and you were very generous with the museum today. I don't have a great way to show a breakdown of all the names. I was trying to catch a couple names that were coming through there, but I can't get them all. But $875 for the museum today to support accessible programs like this. So the viewers that are watching, thank you for being so generous in making things like this more supported and therefore more possible to reach more people and be a more frequent thing. Just thank you so much. For now, we do have a show that's coming up next month. I think I queued this up here. Let's see here. Next month, we'll be talking with some of the scientists from OSIRIS-REx about the sample returns. If you saw the big news there, OSIRIS-REx sample returning to Earth. We'll be talking with them next month on November 19th. But for this month, that is the end of our show here. Again, this is Astro Live. You know how to find us. like and subscribe. Click all the different things to find your way back here. Thank y'all for being so much a part of this community. Summer, Kimberly, Alicia, thank y'all so much for making today's show possible. We will now do the thing where we all wave goodbye, and I will roll the outro. We'll see you nerds later. Thank you so much for today.
And here we go. We have liftoff.
Propulsion continues to be normal.
RCPA chamber pressure looks good.
Following up.
Echo down to nominal.
Flight downside FD off. Bring in FD off. It's orange! 145! Oh my god! Decollage! What do you think? Put that in the big bag,
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
This methane would be igniting in the flare, correct?